Hey everybody, welcome back to the Connected Classroom. My name is Rusty May. I'm a school counselor by trade and have been doing distance education of one kind or another for the last 17 years. Really proud to be a part of the Learning Revolution's emergency summit on teaching tips for parents, teachers, students to really talk about what's going on right now and some ways to make things work. And we're going to talk a lot about that today, and I appreciate you being here. We normally start the show by introducing ourselves. So if any of you, Adriana, R. Bailey, or I think it's Selena, Celaya, Sophia, want to say hello, please do so. But I want to introduce our special guest today, a friend of the show. Jim's been on with me several times over the last 6 months. Jim Scribner is the superintendent and principal of the Capay School District, and he's going to join us today to share some good news about what's working in his district. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Rusty. Thanks for having me. I'm always excited to be here and look forward to some good conversation today.
Thanks. So what's going on basically?
Well, we started, as I've said before, we started our distance learning back in March when they shut down the school and all the schools in our area and into the state of California. And boy, we jumped on it. We were shut down on Monday the 16th, and by the 18th of March, we were pushing out work, pushing out lessons, serving meals, and we really haven't stopped since then. I think our distance learning model has only gotten more robust as we started the school year in August this year. Just so impressed with the staff and the parents and the students and the creativity and the willingness to learn new things and to really talk about learning and what learning is and how we assess it, how we push it out, what are the real positive aspects that we can carry on into the classroom when we do finally come back for some in-person instruction. So there's been so many wonderful things that have come out of this, and I hope to be able to talk about a few of those in detail today.
Well, it's great. I'm going to ask to see if anybody wants to join our conversation. I know Teddy is always open to say hello. Hey, Teddy, see if I can get you off. Teddy, how you doing?
Hi, good day everyone. How are you?
Good. What's going on in New York?
Couple few things. So recently, as of Friday, the school I work at, SUNY Geneseo, located in upstate New York, decided to go remote after Thanksgiving. So
Wow.
that's definitely a positive thing. I think based on what may happen with the winter and given the flu season coming soon, they figure, well, if we let the students just not return back after Thanksgiving, they can take their finals at home. Other than that, we are seeing a surge of cases in the United States, especially in New York City. So it is a possibility they may actually shut down New York City schools. I think right now they're above 3%, and they're trying to keep it below a 3% threshold. But other than that, things are going well.
Good. Thanks for being here, Teddy. I appreciate it. Hope you'll join in as we go forward.
Thank you.
You know, some good news too, Jim, that I was reading today was a study that was just recently done about why children seem that there does seem to be an uptick in cases. And Adriana, Ruth, is it Celia? Celia, I'm going to ask you guys to join in after I talk to Jim about this, but I was reading some good news. And if you hear a buzz in the background on my thing, they're doing some work in our building. So I apologize in advance if you're hearing some construction noise. But they were saying there was some uptick, more so in the middle to the upper school grades. But they were saying in the elementary schools there was really not currently that big of a concern in terms of the number of cases and so forth. But the results that came out recently, which was some more good news, especially for those of us that have younger kids, was the idea that why kids under the age of 12 or 13 are able to fight off the virus more effectively. And apparently it has to do with how their immune system responds to a threat. And so I remember when I lived where Jim is now in Northern California, I was warned about rattlesnakes because I was a big hiker. And the thing they tell me is that the baby rattlesnakes are the most dangerous because they don't know how to release their venom. They'll release an entire load of venom at one time, whereas an adult is much more cautious as to how it releases its venom. And the same is true of immune systems. So the research that came out today was saying that the young children's immune systems go into full alert as soon as they notice something that's never seen before. So their immune systems are turning 100% on, whereas as you get older, your immune system becomes more graded. And so then it allows, some certain things to come in and it doesn't react immediately, which is really positive. Have you seen any upticks, Jim, in your community at all in Northern California?
Um, we're just on a downward trend right now for the last 2 weeks, which is really good. But it's interesting. We've had very few, if any. I think there've been 2 or 3 younger people, and I say under the age of 12, and it's been really unremarkable. They've had symptoms and they are sick with what we know to be true, but nothing has impacted really school age children in a significant way. It's, as you said, it's the adults and older people that we know worldwide are more at risk. So any uptick that we have has been, through the gatherings that they talk to us about. People get together to celebrate birthdays, or families get together to celebrate anniversaries, and you spend a lot of time in close proximity. And we know that that's one of the big no-nos, and one of the things we shouldn't do if we're going to prevent this, which is one of the things that actually makes in-person instruction at school so attractive, especially when we can mitigate a lot of those factors that contribute to getting the illness. But then also when we're talking about young kids, we don't want them to get the illness, obviously, but we certainly want to keep our staff healthy because they're the ones that are serving the kids. So the precautions are really, really important as we move forward with our learning, both in person and online.
Right. Adriana, were you interested? Would you like to introduce yourself to the group? We've got 5 or 6 people here today, but a lot more people watching the Learning Revolution Summit online. If you'd like to introduce yourself and tell people where you're from, you can share in the chat as well if you'd like to. Ruth, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Ruth Bailey. I'm high school librarian in Northwest Indiana, rural community. Our whole county has about 26,000 people. We've been in person since August 5th.
How's it going?
Pretty well. We've got about 25-30% of high school who are doing their schooling virtually. But other than that, we've been doing pretty well.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us today. I hope you'll join our conversation as we go forward.
Thank you.
Sophia, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but you can tell me if you'd like to introduce yourself to the group. Would you like to say hello? Let us know where you're from. Hi. All right. How about Michael? Michael, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm calling. I just got on from St. Louis, Missouri.
Okay. Thank you. How are things in Missouri?
They appear to be fine.
Are you an educator as well?
I'm a farmer educator. I've dabbled in a few things still, but I left in the 2019 school year.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us today. I hope you'll join in the conversation.
Sure.
Sergiva, would you like to introduce yourself before we move forward? Hi.
Hi from Russia.
Okay, thank you for joining us. Are you an educator?
Yeah.
Okay, what grades do you teach?
Actually, in high school.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
All right, so Jim, we want to make this positive. The last couple of times that we've had conversations over the last 6 months, I think, we're kind of leaning on the what ifs sort of thing. And when I talked to you about joining the Learning Revolutions Emergency Summit, you were really excited about sharing some stuff on the positives that were going on. A few things that you said earlier, you talked about a new definition of what learning is, and you want to talk about that a little bit more in terms of what you guys have figured out?
Well, sure. I think one of the first things, obviously, is when you're in the online format, you have to think about lesson delivery. You have to think about how you can communicate and develop that relationship and rapport with the kids. So it's created some real deep conversations at a staff level. Okay, I've got a target audience. I've got a limited amount of time. I don't have the same kind of interpersonal engagement. So what are those key elements? We'll start with lesson design. What are those key elements of lesson design that we need to have? More importantly, I was at a webinar yesterday with Doug Fisher, Nancy Fry, and John Hattie, and some of you may be familiar with their work. But what we're really talking about is engagement of the student. What does engagement look like? And one of the things we're trying to do, and I think we're fairly successful, is we want to move the students from simply just participating in the lesson into investing in the learning and ultimately driving their own learning. And when we talk about designing lessons, we can look at what elements of the lesson, okay, a simple question and answer, yes or no thing, a kid can raise their hand and participate in the lesson. But when they move into asking questions about the topic or asking questions, they're moving into the investing portion of that. And then when they start to self-assess and realize, okay, I can kind of control what I want to learn about this topic, then they're really starting to drive the way they're learning. And I think this format and the distance learning has really fostered and facilitated that. So many times we get into our routine, right? Oh, it's another year of school. Here we go again. I'll pull out the binder, what I did last year, and you've kind of stopped thinking. So one of the greatest benefits is just really redefining what learning is and how important it is for the individual to be invested and in control of their own learning.
So how are you doing that? And I know that from my own doing my daily show. It's so interesting because I think over the last 5 years, I got into a routine of kind of recreating the shows from last year. And now with things being so different, I'm really writing from scratch. And I find it much more invigorating. And it certainly does feel more, obviously getting to a point and figuring out what that point is and so forth. But in my show, I try to reduce the amount of information, really stick to the salient points. But what are you guys doing to draw them into that self-analysis, into that self-learning piece? Are you asking open-ended questions? Are you asking them to look things up online?
Yeah, well, what we're starting with and what we started with is we needed to give them the tools and the framework in order to think about that. So we started teaching the kids to ask the following questions, like, what am I learning? Why am I learning it? And how will I know that I learned it? And so we're having to train the kids and talk about having them articulate that. And, they write it down. We can do interviews. There's all sorts of ways to have the kids begin to think about it that way. But it's really those three questions, and teaching the kids how to use those questions and answer them effectively was really the starting point for us.
How much time, because I'm hearing some stories and some really difficult stories from parents talking about kids being online between 6 and 7 hours a day in terms of, and the expectations of teachers to teach their classes as if the class is in fact a face-to-face class, even if they're online, or a hybrid model where they're teaching half online and half in person. Are you expecting your teachers to be online with the kids for a normal 6-hour day, or is there different?
We actually went the opposite, and our expectation, we started off with one 30-minute meeting a day. And we were really intentional about that it was really, we needed to develop this classroom online. And that was our goal, which is what we would normally do in person. is we developed the routines, we talked about procedures, we talked about what etiquette is on a Zoom meeting or on a Google Meet. And we really tried to mimic some of those things, but the idea that we could sustain a 6-hour day online in this two-dimensional format was just ridiculous. I looked into the research behind that and it was all over the map. So we just fell back to what we thought could be sustainable and practical. And we did receive some criticism for that. But since then, everybody that has started with 3, 4, 5-hour days has since backed off because they realize that you just can't attend in this virtual environment for a continuous period. I mean, 30 to 45 minutes for older kids is a stretch. And I mean, we think about our own selves. Here we are talking for 30, 45 minutes, and even for adults, unless it's really engaging or you're really participating, you're going to wander. You're going to flip over to another tab on your computer. So we started small. We are now doing 2 full class 30-minute meetings a day. And then we're doing breakout intervention, support, relationship building with small groups and individual students. And that's become really manageable and sustainable.
Now, in terms of the etiquette of the meetings and so forth, are you setting up? You're really coming to the kids, especially the younger kids, in terms of understanding what it means to be on a meeting and so forth. What are some of the tips that you're sharing with the younger kids? Is it basically raising your hand, try not to act out? What's working in that regard for the younger ones?
You know what works the best with the younger ones is we really focused on partnering the parents up with their kids. The parents, I think we were all under the impression the kid was just going to sit down, the student was going to sit down in front of the computer and we were going to teach them all those things, which we did do. We talked about how to mute and unmute. It was really practical. Where's the mute button? Okay, let's all practice that. How do you turn your camera on and off? How do you log in? Those were the basics. The etiquette was similar to the classroom etiquette, but what was really powerful was to get the parents on board and say, look, it's 30 minutes a day. Please sit next to your child and enjoy this learning process with them. Learn how to mute yourself, learn what it means to be online, and learn the manners of being on a Zoom meeting. And so specifically, it was just manners and really reminding kids of in-person manners, but then how does that look? How do you mute yourself? Just those practical aspects of a meeting, where to place the camera, what the lighting is. But the real power and the positive part of this, and I'm repeating myself, is really getting the parents on board. And the parents, the comments I've heard about how they better understand what learning is and how they see their child struggling, and it's okay when the child struggles because that's part of the learning process, and really having them join in us really made all the difference for the kindergarten through 4th and 5th grade.
But we've had this conversation before, and we've talked about the importance of parents getting back to work. And in your situation, being in somewhat of a rural area, it may be a little bit more, conducive to that kind of thing. But is there pushback in areas where parents do need to get back out and start working again, where that hour of online education is really, it's not enough? I mean, what do we have? Community organizations that are helping, that are providing other resources to take care of kids for periods, even if parents are working from home, so that they can get some stuff done?
So several things have happened in this county and counties surrounding us is parents took on and created learning pods and
Right.
created classrooms in their house. That was one way to allow parents, the parents that need to get back to work, do that. And so they've got a lot of parents came and they borrowed desks from the school. We gave them as many materials as we could so they could set up an environment in their home. Grandparents got involved. We are bringing students on campus in a safe manner to access, to be in a classroom environment. So they're attending their virtual meetings, but they're on the school site socially distanced or distanced so that they can still access what they need to do. So what we really was able to do, and like I said, a lot of the surrounding counties, was reach out and talk, have a conversation with each and every family and come up with a solution so that we could allow the parents to continue doing what they needed to do to take care of their family, but also not have the kids miss out on the instruction that they needed. So it was really a village, a community effort to pull our resources together to make that happen.
How about the food aspect of it? Is that still working as well in terms of being able to get the kids who need it the free and reduced lunch program?
Yes, one of the things we started this year, every morning we do deliveries every day. Some kids come and pick things up, but really what we found is between the students being on their meetings and parents being at work, nobody had any time to come pick up meals. So we've got two drivers. It's small. We take 130 meals out into the community every day, breakfast and lunch. And the other schools in the area are serving 400 and 500 meals a day in that model. So again, going back to the connections and the relationships, which we've talked about are really important in learning. I can't think of anything better than your teacher or someone from the school coming and dropping off some freshly prepared food that day for you. That's got to make your day a lot better. Just that simple aspect of it. So it's the whole package, really, that we're trying to do.
Now, the SEL part of it, the social emotional learning part and the relational part of it, like you said, those are incredible to see your teacher show up with some fresh food and doing those kinds of things. But with the kids, so your kids are coming on campus also to access some additional things. What's the reaction of the kids to all of this in terms of the way that you're hearing how the kids are reacting? We were speaking to a principal a couple weeks ago who said that the best thing that happened, that they went back face to face, was that the kids brought fun back into the school environment, and it really was engaging. But he said he'd also he feared that what we had taught kids over the last 6 months was to be afraid, and to be afraid of people in general. And that was concerning for me to hear. I mean, are you noticing the kids are engaging with each other? Are they talking about their feelings and their emotions about some of the loss that they've experienced?
That's interesting. I'm not hearing those conversations at that level. Right now, that common theme K-12 is I just want to be with my friends. I
Right.
just want to see my friends. I want to hang out. I want to talk to them. I don't see that there's any fearfulness of doing that. It's just the desire to want to be around people, that human connection piece. As far as anything deeper, I anticipated, you know, things that look like depression. I anticipated students withdrawing, parents withdrawing. Fortunately, we haven't seen uh, any of that in a significant way at all. And I think we've been really mindful at the school site and with our county social services to continue to reach out and connect up, because it's not the math lesson or the reading lesson or the history lesson. It's the fact that you've got someone that cares about you on a regular basis, making connections with you, and you're not sitting at home feeling like you've been forgotten. And so that's the really important piece for us, was to maintain those connections, because by doing that, I think it prevents kids and parents from going off into that dark place when you go weeks and weeks and weeks without a connection. So I, like you, anticipated more of that, but so far we haven't seen a significant amount of that.
Now, you're connected with the rest of the state of California, which obviously is our largest populated state in the United States, and we have the most, I believe, students in the United States. And so you're in connection with the other principals and superintendents, and with all the things that were happening this summer, including the fires and some significant social issues that were happening. Are you hearing now you're talking about the outlying areas that are similar to where you are, but in the bigger cities and so forth, are you getting any feedback about how things are going there?
It's really interesting. We attended a webinar last week with other administrators from all over the country, but also within the state of California. And I think while there are some local challenges, um, for the most part, everybody is moving forward in a positive direction. Um, the bigger areas have a few more challenges, just the sheer number of kids, a little more maybe social unrest in some areas, and of course the fires have had a big impact. We've had schools closed down because of the fires, which at first I thought, well, if you're distance learning, couldn't you still keep that going? But I guess if your school's closed, and you don't have the resources and the computers to do that, it's hard to do. But throughout the state of California, I think it just depends, as in many areas, what you're dealing with. COVID, you've got distance learning, and then you've got some natural events going on. If it's not fires, it's hurricanes. If it's not hurricanes, it's tornadoes. So again, trying to stay together and focus on what we can do and not lament all the things that we're not able to do. There's still a lot of positive energy going around, and I think that's throughout the state. We're hearing that. There's fewer meetings where we just talk about all the problems, and people are blowing up chat rooms, sharing solutions and ideas, and the creativity that's come out of this is unbelievable. And I have to think that that's worldwide. We have some guests here that are from all over the world, and I have to assume that that's going on anywhere that is facing some of these challenges.
So what are some of the other things that you've heard in terms of that creativity? I know you mentioned earlier about student self-assessment, and I was wondering if that was part of your original 3 questions. What am I learning? Why am I learning it? And how do I know when I learned it?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering also about that self-assessment. Are we thinking about testing and grading this year, or is that something that is going to take place?
Um, I guess we're calling it feedback for learning. And I think that's a good way to think about it. I mean, we're still doing some formal or informal. You do the spelling test or you do a quick math facts review. I think to help promote some of that regularity and normalcy, and you're fulfilling some of those expectations. But as far as assessment and formal assessments, we're moving more toward a feedback for learning type of model, where I heard yesterday one person, a math teacher, is giving math tests that are already filled out and completed. And the students then need to go through each of those, find out whether it's correct, and if not, why, and start analyzing the processes. And by doing that, a teacher can really see and more about how the student thinks about their learning and what the learning means to them. And so this person said he's never going to give a blank math test again. So that's just one example of how we're refocusing. I think that learning and feedback and struggle and mistakes are part of the learning process, and we can't put a finite time frame on when you're supposed to learn all your math facts or all the vocabulary words. It's a dynamic evolution of learning. And I think by talking about feedback for learning and that learning is continuous, we're starting to get away from some of those formal time-dependent tests. I don't think we're going to be taking standardized tests in the near future. I don't see it this year. I don't see it in the next 5 years, to tell you the truth. As a practical standpoint, the information will be meaningless, given the dynamics of all the different types of learning that has gone on in the last 6 months. But hopefully the outcome of this is we'll move more into a formative, assessment for learning reflection model rather than the old standardized testing model.
Yeah, it's kind of like, reading a book about riding a bike and learning how to ride a bike. I mean, those, you can take a test on riding a bike. We had a guest last week, Howard, who was just a fiery older educator who was retired, and he would love to hear that because he was all fired up about how schools were failing kids and that we were trying to force, because in his point was the most salient to me was the idea that schools used to have a monopoly on information. And now everybody's phone has more information than any given school does. So the idea of acquisition of information as the driving force behind schools, it really doesn't make sense. And, certain kids are going to get it when they get it. It's like we're struggling with my 4-year-old daughter about potty training. And every single person that we talk to, the answer is she's going to get it when she gets it. It's, you can get into power struggles with her. You can force her this, force her that, but it's just, and then yesterday she comes home from school and she says, my friend's wearing panties. Can I wear panties? Well, if her friend's wearing, she doesn't want to have a pull-up on. She's going to figure out how to pee on the toilet, right? Because it's valuable and important to her. But, school's never been that way. And we talked about this, I think, several times about what an absolute renaissance this could be for public education.
No, I think you're absolutely right. One of the things we've talked about is how this needs to be, learning needs to be a joyful, rewarding, fun, engaging experience. And how do we do that? It's an experience. It happens over time and it never ends. It's not from 8:45 to 3:30. It's part of your person. It's part of your being. It's part of what we all do. And there should be joy and enjoyment and anticipation to the next day, and anticipation even when it gets hard. But when it's hard, you don't get defeated because everybody's working on this together. And we're really trying to promote that, at least here. And I hear from other educators that, again, this learning environment, we've got to boil it down to what the essentials are. And we've got to go back to that engagement. We've got to get kids away from just responding to questions into asking questions and then setting the goal. It's that whole engagement piece. And what better way to do that with the anticipation that something cool and fun and joyful and exciting is going to happen, today, in the next hour, in the next week.
I also think too is that part of the reason that we've had this extended school day and all these requirements and all this stuff has been stuffed into 7, 8, 9, sometimes 10, 11, 12 hours is because of the reality of parents working and the public good that schools have provided in terms of being able to bring, have kids occupied and so forth. And I wonder if that's going to change as well. I mean, the idea that we could get this done in a shorter period of time and give kids more, that idea that they need to be learning for 6 hours a day, I think, it's not realistic. And I'm not sure that, especially at the younger grades or even the older kids, that they have the mind capacity to stay connected for that long of a period of time. So maybe this talks about shortening, and these other social agencies will come along that can provide additional services and other things, teaching kids life skills. We've talked about that with that classroom that's on your campus that has a kitchen and has, clean and I think it had a laundry facility and stuff like that. It was like teaching kids real life skills and teaching them how to take care of themselves and getting them excited about those kinds of things, being self-sufficient in the ways that they can. And I think the whole thing could evolve into a much more robust and Renaissance type schooling, as opposed to this very strict, ABCs, 1, 2, 3, 3 R's kind of a thing.
Well, too, and I think getting it's the opportunity to bring parents back into this part of their children's lives, because when
Right.
we talk about kids being at school for 12 hours, we've sent the message that, hey, don't worry, drop your kids off, we'll take care of everything. Well, I think this gives us an opportunity to bring parents and the community back into this exciting learning format and helping raise and grow our kids. Michael talked about being a farmer teacher and things. And of course, Northern California is a huge agricultural community, in the whole Sacramento Valley and different parts throughout the country. So getting community members and people like professors and other people back into to join in the part of this and helping kids understand that every opportunity you have is an opportunity for learning. It just doesn't happen at the times that I say it does, and because you may not be ready for it. And if everyone understands that and is part of that, then your daily interactions are going to change with people. I have to think, and you're going to become more connected, more invested, maybe more likely to volunteer or jump in and help somebody. I mean, I think some of our behaviors are going to change because of this in a real positive way.
The elementary school that we are at in the small town that we're in Portugal, they have chickens. They have a small garden, and they raise food that they serve in the cafeteria. They do things like that with the eggs and use the eggs from the chickens, and the kids are involved in that process. So they bringing them into that process, getting their hands in the dirt, having them do stuff like that. I mean, so many of the things that I appreciated about my education process or some of the classes. I remember when I was in high school, we had home ec, we had auto shop, we had wood shop, we had metal shop, we had all these different kinds of things. And over the last 20 years, all of that has pretty much gone away. And it's unfortunate because we really don't know what the world's going to look like. Obviously, the word out from the education department is that STEM is the only way forward, and that they're talking about that sort of thing. But my brother's a Marine officer, and he always tells me the guy that can fix a small engine, the guy that can get something running in a sandstorm, those are the guys that mean the most to me. And I think that's going to be true going forward. We're obviously going to need the rocket scientists and the STEM people, but we're going to need kids who know how to get around and know how to take care of themselves and know how to do things. And I've missed that in school. In my 17 years of working in schools, that none of that was activated. And maybe this is an opportunity to get some of that back.
Well, shouldn't education be helping each person fulfill their their fullest potential? And it sounds like a cliche, but it's the facilitating of that. I mean, going to school is not going to school just so you can go to college for 4 more years. I mean, it's a global, we're a global society. I can rattle off all the cliches, but when it comes down to what our passion is and what we should be doing, we should be guiding and helping those kids be engaged in their interests and pointing them in the right direction and giving them opportunities to look into things that interest them instead of boxing them into the standardized learning that we expect everyone to learn. I mean, the common knowledge piece, it can be done in no time at all. I mean, that's a simple thing. For what connects us up as a community is our relationships with each other, not necessarily the fact that we all know the same historical piece about our community or about our country. Those are very, very important things, but they shouldn't be taken up the kind of time that we insist that they need to at the expense of squashing that creativity and that interest and that excitement that we all know kids are born with. And we've talked about this, and for some reason when they turn 8 or 9 or 10 years old, education has stamped that curiosity out of them, and then they've learned just to do school. At least the successful ones have.
Yeah, and that's, to do school, and that's what it's become, right? It's become a task-oriented situation. It's not something that's fun and engaging. And now, especially with what's going on and some of the social issues and some of the things that are going on at the highest levels of government right now, and to have schools bringing communities together again. I heard somebody say the other day, was talking about the idea that there's two Americas now and two different points of view. And I talk to a lot of kids, and especially in places like Montana and some areas in the Midwest, who are asking questions about all this stuff and who are hearing, a lot of that sort of that sound chamber that's happening at the highest levels. And they're concerned and confused about it. And it's really gratifying to talk with you and to hear about the fact that it feels like, the schools are really starting to re-embrace that initial idea of what a school was supposed to be about, which is part of bringing kids into a community, making them into a citizen, involving them in an educated conversation, a debate, whether you agree or don't agree. But all of these things we're going to need as we move forward through these difficult challenges.
Too, I think of it in another way, and everyone could ask themselves these questions: is what tools do students need to guide their learning, right? And you're going to need a different set than myself, and everyone here may need a different set, and some of them might be similar, but you don't need 400 of them. But you also don't need just the one way that sometimes we teach. This is the only way to do math. You got to do it this way. Wait a minute, there's a whole bunch of tools out there. So by kids reflecting and setting goals, and then the teachers and the adults facilitating the tools to help them meet those goals, is just a real empowering thing. We all can remember when someone gave us a different way to think about something or shared something with us that the light bulb went off, made our lives easier, realized, oh my gosh, I can do it this way. This is fantastic. Suddenly the world is a different place. You know, the sun's a little brighter and your heart's a little lighter. And that should be a big goal of what we are all trying to do, no matter what level we're involved in education.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was Rose Throkeld in high school. She taught me that I was an audio learner. She made me take her Shakespeare class, and I didn't want to, but she played Shakespeare on records, and I'm an audio learner. And I was a 2.530 student up until my senior year in high school. And after that, it was basically just straight through. I learned how to use listening and being a part of it and taking notes in class, and those kinds of things worked much better for me than the reading part of it. And it just changed my whole educational you know, uh, uh, whatever. And it wasn't until high school that kind of a thing happened. And so I appreciate that. I also wonder too, and this is something that I've been questioning since, the last, it has become so obvious that there are significant differences in opinion about what works and what doesn't work in our country at the political level. And I've made the comment to my wife that I think that at some point, I don't know what the number is, but maybe 400 million is the number where democracy breaks down because you have too many people and it becomes too difficult to try to get all of those people on the same page. And I wonder if the same is true of this kind of top-down education policy that we've had since No Child Left Behind and all of these kinds of things where they've been trying. Well, they give independence to local jurisdictions, but at the same time, they've been basically saying that this is what the workforce has to look like in order for us to continue to move forward. And so maybe part of this will be, allowing, districts and schools and so forth to take up more of this on an independent level. I don't know if you're getting that feeling or not.
Um, Well, I think you make a point, and that not to get too off topic, but we are, the message is that we have local control and that we can do whatever we want to do. But the reality is that that isn't the case. There's either roadblocks put up or lack of funding, or as you said, the opposite message is, oh, you can do what you want, but if you want your kids to be successful, then here's what we need in the workforce, right? So they've tied your hands, made you think that it's your own doing. I think I agree with you though. I think this is going to reshape that, or shake that up for us as people become more empowered, and frankly, um, the different opportunities that are going to be an outcome of this environment, whether it be jobs created or job loss, or what the new needs are going to be. We've got to prepare ourselves to accommodate for that, and not in a traditional um, schooling sense of the way.
Well, it
That
sounds
was
like things are getting a lot more flexible, and I think that was part of the thing that we were talking about in terms of the idea that this is going to have some positive effects, because I simply think that there wasn't really anyone who wanted to stand up and take responsibility for the reopening or how it was going to be done, or hybrid or half, or full in person and that kind of stuff. So maybe by default, schools are given back that identity of being able to set their own trail.
Mhm.
But, you know, again, any other last, we're coming up on our 45 minutes, any last ideas about some of that idea of the filled out math test? I think is absolutely brilliant. You know, we used to do that with trying to get kids to, you could figure out the problem, but then you had to prove your work. But this sounds like a much better way to do that, where you just kind of ask the kid to take a look at it and figure out what's wrong and do that. But any other of that kind of stuff that you can share with our audience for the people watching?
I think one of the other things, yeah, thank you, is we want to ask students, you know, where they're going in their learning. But I think more specifically, one of the things I liked was make sure as an educator, you're presenting what the criteria for success is right at the very beginning. Involve the kids in how things are going to be measured, because one of the things we see kids is they sit with their poised over the paper not knowing what to write because they don't know if that's what the teacher wants them to write.
Right.
Well, let's not make that a mystery, and this isn't new, but present the success criteria so they know ahead of time, and then they can judge, and they can judge each other. Oh, you met the success criteria because here's what we determined is going to be a success in this lesson or in this activity. So I think that's another key point that I'd like to encourage everyone to consider.
And it's not, the success is not A, B, or C either. I mean, that's the most ridiculous idea ever. It's like, here's a grade. We're going to give you a letter to tell you that you were successful.
No, it's what are you going to be able to do? How will I know that what can I demonstrate? What can I talk about? What can I show evidence for that I met the success criteria and I know how to do whatever it is we were talking about?
Well, like I said, I can't thank you enough for being here. If any of you would like to, any final comments, I know Teddy will probably join in and tell us some stuff as we leave, but thank you all for being here. If anybody has any final comments, I'll come back to you at the end, Jim. Teddy, anything?
Thank you, Jim, for your insight. I definitely appreciate what you had to say. As an employee for the library at the school I work at, I definitely feel that what you said definitely helps me to better communicate with my students in terms of helping them moving forward. I know a lot of my students who graduated prior to the pandemic, you know, having spoken to them and getting a feel of what they wanted to do post-graduate, and now with students who are a year or two, you know, into their graduation, or talking to them, getting a feel to see what they want to do, what their plans are. I think part of the problem with a lot of students is their parents, is they're being forced to either be a lawyer, be a doctor. But in reality, they want to be something else. And I think following their passion, their desire, and making sure that they're not doing something that they're going to later regret in life, but rather enjoy and be happy, I think is something I'm really going to emphasize moving forward when I have my meetings or just have my casual conversations with them. So thank you.
Thanks, Teddy. Yeah, and I want to jump in on that too, because I tell you, man, my as being a 57-year-old man, I would think that my ideas would have been stuck years ago. But the idea of following your passion, following your bliss, all of these kinds of things has changed for me, because that teacher I mentioned to you, Rose Throkeldt, she wrote in my yearbook, "To thine own self be true." And I've spent the last 40 years basically gazing at my own navel, trying to figure out what makes me happy, or most of the time what I notice is it's what's right in front of you. And a lot of times what kids avoid is the things that they're good at. Say I grew up as a farmer's son, or I grew up as I grew up learning how to hunt or fish or doing something like that in Northern California. And those are things I really enjoy doing, but I think to myself, well, that's too easy. And I don't know why, but there's some sense that the easy road is not the right road to take. We get this idea, but it's a false reading of, two paths diverge in the woods and I took the one less traveled. That's not what that poem is about. And it's like, you're not supposed to make it harder. You're supposed to dance with the girl that brung you. And if you're not a rocket scientist, then do something else. If you're really good at making saddles, make saddles. If you're really good at riding horses, ride horses. But we haven't been telling kids that. You got to work hard. You got to figure out who you are. You got to. It's like nobody ever figures out who they are. That's just that's a self-help. That's how you sell books. You put on. You want to figure out who you are. Here, buy my book. And then you basically give yourself to somebody else, and you allow them to tell you who you are. So, I love the idea of just do what's right in front of you to do. And for the next 5 years, there's nothing else to do. That's it. You know, everybody's going to be figuring out how to get through this. Everybody's going to be doing that. And we need to take the pressure off of kids. And if their parents are trying to make them a lawyer or a doctor, hey, if your dad was a lawyer, you watched what it meant to be a lawyer. My dad was an Air Force officer. I probably would have been pretty good at it. But I was, you know, tired of the Air Force at that point at 18 years old. But, you know, there's things that we can, you know, we can help kids. It doesn't have to be hard. They don't, you know, I don't know, Jim, do you share any of those sentiments?
Oh no, there's quite a few people that believe that unless you really have worked hard and it was hard and you had
Yeah.
to put in extra time and devote, then you really didn't earn it. But we
Yeah.
all know people that are so skilled at things, they don't have to put a lot of time into it. My son was one of those. School was so easy for him and he didn't have to do homework and it was and people were always criticizing that he wasn't engaged and that he wasn't putting in the time and he should be punished, you know, by not getting the A because he's not putting in the time. And we can't do that to people. We wouldn't do that to each other as adults, and you can't, in good conscience, if you care about people, equate time to an effort into success. I mean, it's just ridiculous, and I think it's a myth too that I think we see pro athletes and that think, well, they were just born that way. Well, no, most of them work very, very hard to hone their skills. Whereas others, yeah, they just fall out of bed and they can do whatever they want. But again, like you said, be true to yourself and really identify what gives you joy and then hook up with people like Teddy and the rest of us that help support those dreams.
Yeah, when LeBron James was 6'3" in fourth grade or whatever, you know, he's 250 pounds and 6'3" in fourth grade,
Yeah.
you know, and he's telling his teacher, I want to be a jockey. It's like, you know, that's hard. That'd be really, really hard to do. And it's like, you know what, dude, and again, most of the athletes that are professional, at least now, I mean, obviously, like you said, they've worked hard, but the the sheer ability and then the other thing too is that you see that most of these, especially the kids who are following in like in soccer, especially if you see a kid who's got a soccer program or who's good at soccer or who is following in their parents' footsteps, and they're normally their father or their mother was an athlete. They grew up in that regard. A lot of baseball players, their dads were coaches. You know, you see these kinds of things in sports and everybody says, oh, he worked really hard. You know, he's the youngest coach ever, blah, blah, blah. Well, he grew up. He's been doing it since he was, you know, he was a month old. And, you know, I think helping kids just take a deep breath and not try to think to them, I got to be an athlete, or I've got to be this, or I got to be that. And there's so much of that going on right now. That's what I loved about school, was giving kids the opportunity to rethink what being wealthy really meant. You know, what's it mean to be wealthy? What's it mean to be successful? What's it mean to be somebody who has lived life? You know, people always ask me, what do you think about life after death? I said, I have no idea. That's above my pay grade, but I'm more interested in life after birth, because I've met a lot of people that have never even figured that part out. You know, they just kind of go to work and they make money and that's what they do. And so if school's moving in that direction, Jim, I'm all in favor. And I can't thank you enough for being with us today to share some real positive stuff.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and I always appreciate the time that people take to come and listen to at least what one person has to say. I think I want to leave you all with one thing, and this could be a topic for a future cast. But educators, do not get caught up in what they're calling learning loss. There's this perception that the kids have missed out on school and they're going to be behind and there's a learning loss and they'll never catch up. I've just started doing some research on that, and most of what I'm reading is that any learning loss that is experienced is insignificant and won't have any bearing on what they're doing when they're 25 years old. That's a huge thing in California. I don't know about the rest of the world, but when you hear those words learning loss, be really skeptical, because it's dangerous if we start crafting our school system around this perception that kids have lost everything, so we have to backtrack and slow down and suck all the life out of it. So I'll leave it at that, and maybe we'll talk about that in the future.
Great. I look forward to it. Thank you all for being here today. Thanks for those of you that are watching the recording or listening to it on the podcast. This is the Connected Classroom. And as always, we are grateful for everything you're doing for the kids in your care. You're heroes. You are the front line right now in the fight to get kids back to being kids and enjoying learning. And we can't thank you enough. We'll be here every week. Look forward to seeing you again. Take care. My name's Rusty May, and I appreciate you being here with us on the Connected Classroom.